So my name is Paula Anderson, and I am a member of the Society of Professional Journalists. And I wanted to give individuals, primarily students and faculty, and also local journalists, some insights on editing. We know that journalism has shifted over the last 10 years, and I wanted to bring a panel together that have extensive expertise within the media industry, but can also add value to giving students, and hopefully we'll get some students to watch the recording of this, give students some understanding of what it means to be a journalist and just some of the things that you've seen over your career and some things that you think may need to be done within the next few years. So I'm going to allow each panelist to introduce yourself, to tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll go into the conversation. So we'll start with you, Terrance.
Can you hear me? All right, so my name is Terrance. I currently teach at Arkansas State University in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I'm from Monroe, Louisiana, bachelor's photojournalism, master's communication. Started off as a photojournalist at a Gannett-owned paper, the News Star. We covered about 17 parishes all the way up to the Mississippi, and then even more in some situations. But worked there, did that for about 5 years, left, went worked for a university, did that for about 4 years, went back into newspapers. This time I was in Arkansas, Laredo News Times, did that for about 2 years, became the news editor. And when I left, I was a news editor, having been the interim managing editor on 2 occasions. And now I teach here. So I started teaching here in 2019, and I'm still here.
You guys can just keep going.
Okay. Hi, my name is Lynn Norment, and happy to be here with all of you. I started my career here at the Commercial Appeal newspaper right out of Memphis State, and that is what it was back then. After a few years, I started working for Ebony Magazine in Chicago and ended up spending my career there. And it was a great career, exciting, interesting. And for most of the time I was there, I was not only writing, but also managing editor and editing copy for other writers. I retired some years ago, and more recently I moved back to Memphis, and I now write a column for the Commercial Appeal newspaper that is often run in USA Today network across Tennessee.
I can go next. My name is Adrienne Johnson-Martin. I'm the executive editor at MLK 50, Justice for Journalism. I started out actually in magazine. I worked for a trade publication, then in my 20s, and then went back to school at Columbia University and switched to newspaper. Started out at the LA Times as a copy editor. And then did a little writing there and decided, oh, maybe I want to be a reporter now. So I went to the Raleigh News and Observer and worked there until 2013, when, journalism was sort of falling apart. And so I left for a little while and worked as the managing editor of Duke University's alumni magazine. Until during the pandemic, I decided I wanted back into journalism, and that's when I joined MLK 50.
Uh-oh.
You should be good to go, Dr. K.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I'm totally lost on the screen here. But anyway, my name is Karanja Ajanaku. I'm the executive editor of the new Tri-State Defender newspaper here in Memphis. I've been doing that since June of 2007. And I think in early 2018, I became the associate publisher. So I've been in journalism for, I guess, 44 plus years or so. I spent 26 and a half years at the Commercial Appeal. I'm a graduate of the University of Missouri, Columbia. I got out of there in 1977. I was born in Natchitoches, Louisiana, 1955, April 26th. So I'm 68 years old, and I grew up in Kansas City. I got a job right out of school at the Commercial Appeal. And at that time, my name was Leroy Williams Jr. I joined a local research group there and got into studying slavery and how it affects one's behavior in an ongoing way. Got a new name, Karanja Ajanaku, and it started sort of another phase of my journalism career. Did every kind of reporting I think that you could do there at the Commercial Appeal. My last reporting assignment was as a member of the Nashville Bureau. I then came in and started working on the desk as a night Metro editor, deputy Metro editor, and then made a transition over to the copy desk, where I was actually in charge of the copy desk the last few years. I ran the newspaper at night. Left there Christmas night 2003. Went out into the community to try to apply some of the information that I had learned in the course of pursuing journalism, just finding out about communities and where we stand historically. That led me to the Tri-State Defender. Try to get the editor to help me with that. He really wasn't interested, but he did have an internship, sort of a freelance position. I took that, and then I went from being a freelancer to the executive editor in a matter of about 6 months. Thought I'd be there 3 to 5 years, and it has now been 16 years. And that brings me to this conversation.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your journey. The way that we're going to do the panel discussion, I'm going to ask some questions and then we'll open it up. Wendy, since you are our attendee, you're going to have free reign to ask them any questions that you would like. So let's start off by asking, how has journalism shifted from the time that you became a reporter or a journalist or photojournalist? Give us a little bit of the evolution of journalism.
Would you like me to start first?
That'll be fine. That'll be fine.
Okay, sis. So I saw the question and, how has it shifted? I can tell you today, in my opinion, from what I see a lot of young journalists they use the actual term. And I think at one point it was actually a really good term. And the term is activist journalists. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think it's been thwarted a little bit, especially over the past decade. And by that, I simply mean that it's become basically a cover for being biased in journalism. And that actually creates a situation where untrustworthiness amongst journalists and people who work in the news industry just permeates throughout all culture and all society. People no longer trust journalists as much as they used to. And so I think that has a little to do with it. I think it's okay to be an activist, but I think when you're a journalist, you have to be very careful because it's easy to be biased about those things that, you may care about, but at the same time, the objectivity that you're actually supposed to enact can actually be, you can actually lose that. It's easy to lose that too in situations where you have civil unrest. And so I've seen that in my, from what I've seen it on television. I've just seen it. And I see it here in academia where students want to be activists. And by being an activist, what they tend to do is they tend not to report the news, but to report things that they're interested in. And I see it, I see it all the time. And unfortunately, I've seen it in instructors, professors, educators, and it's kind of made me question, hey, is this where this is going? Are we all doing PR now for what we believe in? Because if we're going that route, let me go ahead and get out of it. I didn't get in it to do PR for my belief systems or my ideologies. But nevertheless, don't get me wrong, there are some things I believe in that simply should be reported. But that has to do with humanity and just simple things I think that are human nature. But I think when you kind of get into politics and you get into other things that have to deal with business and corporate interests, it's easy to lose focus. It's easy to report on them too, especially if you're working for newspapers specifically. They're private entities, most of them. If you're not an nonprofit. But I've seen it go from what appeared to me, as a young person, getting education in journalism, to be, man, I'm going to go out there and be this bastion of being fair and objective and say what's right and freedom and democracy and like, oh, wait a minute, maybe the company I'm working for is not even on board with all of this all the time. So and only to come to an educational institution where I thought, man, this is going to be great, and thinking, oh my goodness, wow, okay, maybe this is a little where it is. So I think, in my opinion, either two things: either I'm seeing it more, or I'm realizing it a lot more, and I just didn't see it when I was younger. So I'm not sure which of the ones is true, but I think you have a lot of students and a lot of journalists who are activist journalists, and they kind of muddle around in the realm of being a bit biased, being not as objective. And with cable news, with social media, it's easy to get pulled into that. And I often have to warn students here, hey, be careful what you're reading. Learn and hear the twist in it. Even when we look at CNN, when we look at MSNBC, when we look at Fox, when we look at Al Jazeera, listen, because those are humans who are telling stories. And wherever you have a human, you have, just a nature for error. So just be careful. Okay. That was long, but I'm sorry.
Well, you said a couple of things. So I think one of the things that is being taught is brand journalism, where you're actually using journalism as a way to promote what you're the message that you're trying to put out there. And that may be what you're referencing in terms of the PR. But I would like to ask Dr. McKay, since he does print journalism and has done print journalism, what is your thoughts on that as the news is being reported? Because you do have to cover some of those stories that are related to activism. You're on mute, Dr. K. Okay, Adrienne, why don't you answer, and then we'll come back to Dr. K, since MLK 50 does some activism reporting as well.
I think what's shifted in journalism is that more people are actually trying to live up to the things that journalism has also always said it aspired to. So, for instance, you might have heard as a young journalist, if you're about my age, something like, if your mother says she loves you, check it out, right? Like, everything was supposed to be questioned, but that's not what actually happened, right? We would get, for instance, if you were covering cops or police, you were sent out, you got the press release for the police or the police record, and you reported what was on there. That was taught as the truth. And now we know that police often lie. So I think a lot of the values that we talked about before in journalism are being questioned. And to me, I think that's a really good thing. Like, we should be questioning. I think journalism is a living thing and changing thing. And so we should be as curious as we said we were being. We should be as inclusive as we said we were going to be. We should be questioning what people say, particularly people in authority say. I mean, that's supposed to be a tenet of journalism, that, you know, hold power accountable. And I think that's what people are actually trying to do now. It's not always done perfectly. Sometimes it's done really sloppily, but I think that's what we are trying to do at MLK 50. There's been a certain narrative about institutions that have always been pushed by journalism. There's been certain narratives about Memphis that have come out in legacy journalists and writing. And so we aim to question that. And we don't necessarily reject the term activism, but that doesn't feel like activism to me. That feels like what we're supposed to do as journalists.
Okay, Dr. K.
Terrance, I can appreciate what you're talking about there, because I've asked myself many times, what happened to the industry that I got into? You know, I graduated from the University of Missouri back in '77, and I mean, it was a pretty straight line there in terms of getting the facts and you staying out of the story. And obviously that sort of has changed over time. But I'm in an interesting situation here because I work for a so-called legacy African-American newspaper. And we are, you know, our birth was in activism relative to the African-American community. And so I have to be true to that. And I'm also a hard news journalist, and I don't see any conflict between those two things. And so to sort of help me with that, I coined a term a few years ago. I called it objective activism. Objective activism. And so, yeah, we're activists relative to trying to tell the story of the African American community from the cradle to the grave. You know, we're actively trying to get us from this position to a higher position. You know, we're looking for ways to put information out there to help people make the decisions to get us there. At the same time, I'm a professional journalist. I mean, and I've been at it a long time, and I don't need to make up my record. It is what it is. And it speaks to the fact that I have been a fair, objective journalist all the way through. So I just bring those two things together to cover the news as we see it here. And I just think too that part of it is, I think, was it Wendy said that it's about being a good journalist, period. You know, and some of the things that you do and that you ask, you ought to be asking. You know, you just ought to be asking those kinds of things. And so, to me, it's always, what is it that you know? Where'd you get it from? What's the source of that information? And keep it simple like that.
Okay,
You know,
Lynn.
Yeah, I would like to chime in because I agree with what has been said. And before this point, I never thought about Ebony doing activist journalism, but maybe that is what we were doing as well. You know, when Ebony was at its heyday, and even, you know, while it was still under the leadership of John H. Johnson, because his whole mission was to focus on journalism that pinpointed what was happening in our community, in the African American community across the country, and sometimes around the world. But that didn't mean that we made up stories. We did some investigative pieces, some research pieces, and they were based on facts. And we interviewed people at the top of their game, whether that was in entertainment or in sports or in the business community. And so I always felt like what we did there was based on facts, but from the Black perspective and the Black audience in mind, because of course, a lot of publications were not focusing on what Black people were doing, especially when John H. Johnson started the publication. And we had a specific audience that we were writing for. But of course, a lot of non-white people were very interested in what we had to say anyway. But it was all factual.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. So Terrance, back to your original point there that, you know, one of the things that I lock in on is that I know I have biases. I mean, I absolutely know that. And when I run across anybody who tells me that they don't, I just sort of raise my eyebrows because I know that they got some discovery right around the corner, you know. And so the question isn't whether or not I have them. The question is, what am I going to do with them, right? And take some time to identify exactly what they are. And so because I've done that over time, and because I know when I come to a particular subject, I might be prone to lean one way or the other, what I try to do is I try to say, okay, I hear you saying that, Karanja. I hear you thinking that. Relative to the subject that you're covering, what question do you have as a result of that? You know, so I'm sort of like asking myself a question based upon my bias, and I run it through my professionalism filter and come up with the best question that I can as a result. And I think that has proven to actually work over time. So yeah, we got them. It's just acknowledging them, and then how you're going to make use of them to actually go about the business of getting at the facts and putting people in position to get at what the truth is.
Did you want to respond, Terrance, before we move on to the next question?
More of a comment, because I believe that great comments, by the way. I believe, you know, certainly cultural specific journalism is needed. And to me, that's no different than, you know, very similar to, you know, trade magazine, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So if you're reporting from a cultural perspective, then obviously you can do journalism, or it could be from a religious or ideological perspective. Mm-hmm. However, I think it's when you make those small choices, when you're saying, well, I'm not interested in covering this because it's not as relevant to me and what I'm interested in, not what news is at the moment, but what I'm interested in. I think we should be covering this right here because this is the hot topic. And if that hot topic doesn't draw consensus, then I don't think you should be covering it. And consensus meaning, is it news, you know? But also too, then you shouldn't be letting people off the hook. And in that situation, letting sheriff's departments go by. I think you should ask the hard questions and stay on it. And usually in those situations, especially when you're talking about officials and authority, this isn't activism as much as it is appeasement. And that's kind of, you know, and you can play chess games. And I do understand that, especially at a paper, in the sense of you saying, okay, hey, listen, I'm going to hold this story if you give me a little bit something on this. And so you end up in this chess play, and it depending on what the story is, you know. So I've seen that done before. I've seen these chess moves played before. You know, call it good management, call it whatever. But I've also seen where stories have been, you know, buried for I would say personal reasons, but I know it's more of corporate reasons. We don't want to report too many murders on 1A. We want to put those, you know, in the C section, or we want to make a footnote because all of a sudden, you know, you're not interested in, I'm not going to say telling the truth, but you're not really interested in saying what's really going on. as much, or you're not really in giving it a bullhorn, a megaphone. And I've seen that. I've seen, oh, wait a minute, there's a murder. Why is this in the C-section, And I'm talking in this situation, it would be this town that I live in, Jonesboro, a city of 60,000. So I do understand the idea of putting something within context. So, but no, I understand, branding was a word that I think, thanks for bringing that up, branding. I do understand that branding. I get a little worried when you put something in front of journalism.
Okay.
Let's just say journalism. And if I work, for instance, in my hometown, I grew up with like 3 Black newspapers. Two. And they reported specifically on my culture. And when I got my first job, I ended up working at the Gannett paper. And they didn't report like, a tenth of the stories. And I'm like, wait a minute, And I noticed the difference, primarily because when I was young, I sold those newspapers, and the guy who owned one of the Black newspapers was my teacher. And so I could see the difference, and also felt the criticisms with that too, going into the community. And so I may be sensitive, but I always look at the stories like, okay, is this fair? Is this balanced? Are we reporting on what we should be reporting on? Because if we're missing certain news, that may be cultural specific or something, then I think we need to look at ourselves. But no, I really appreciate the comments, because it was, it informed me quite a bit. I mean, all of your comments.
Okay. So what I want to do is, because we're kind of hinting on what is called citizen journalism, or a citizen journalist, and then a professional journalist. And we know that social media has played a pivotal role in the way reporting is done. And some stories would not have been reported in a mainstream media had they not been posted on social media. So I want you guys to talk about what impact has social media had on the field of journalism from your perspective as an editor or as a reporter. And we'll start with Lynn.
Okay, thank you, because that's on my mind. And I think it's had a great impact on the field of journalism, and more of a negative impact than a positive impact, because I think it has led to people being confused about what is news, and news, reported by a non-biased journalist, and what is fact. Blogs, opinion pieces are not facts, and that's something that worried me when social media became so prominent. But now, it has evolved to the point that we have whole networks who base their reporting and their commentaries and the news supposedly on what we know is not the truth. And people have become very confused. And of course, we all heard about fake news, and that has led to that. And it's gotten to the point that real news, what I consider real news, the facts, is now even called fake news by those who only want to push their own agenda. So social media has done, in my opinion, great damage to the field of journalism. And of course, the decline of the newspaper has been a result of that, and how people get their news, of course, but it's all come to a head. And I'm very concerned about the young people and how they view social media, and how they let that play into what they think is real journalism and real reporting.
Okay. Before we go to Adrienne, so I taught undergraduate students for about a year, and they're getting their news from social media. So Twitter is like a platform that they get their news from. because they're not listening to those network television stations. So when they see something posted on Twitter, they take that as being real news. Adrienne, why don't you give us a perspective, since your publication is online anyway? How do you guys use social media for your reporting?
I think for our reporting, we use it as a tool. It can be a way to find sources, connect with sources. It's also a way to just like push stories out further than they might go. So and I think that's just what we try to remember, that it is a tool. It's not more than that. I think the problems that, Lynn mentioned are, have to do with journalists and other people, giving the voices on social media an outsized voice. Everyone, a lot of people on Twitter, but not everyone. And so just because something is trending on Twitter does not mean everyone is talking about it, or that it is, a widespread opinion. It just means in your thread, like in your Twitter thread, everybody's talking about it, but you're self-selecting those people. So it's not it's a way to sort of maybe see trends and then investigate them, but it shouldn't be like the place that you end. And so that's what we really try to talk to our reporters about, that it's a tool among all the other tools you should be using as a reporter.
Okay, Dr. K?
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. It's definitely a tool in terms of the original question, the impact. It's been profound, and in terms of the measurement of it, it's uncertain. That we're not really sure exactly where it's gonna lead. But in terms of some of the positives, you think about Memphis, Tennessee here recently, and the Tyree Nichols situation. I'm very clear that the very first time I heard anything about Tyree Nichols was through social media. Okay, I happened to be fishing online, looking through, and I saw a press conference that people were Zooming on one of these phone things. Okay, so what the hell is that? I hadn't gotten any kind of notice or anything about it, and so I had to, start scrambling as a result of that, and that's how we got clued into it. And so, and even as we were going through, getting caught up and doing our coverage, you kept us handy to sort of figure out where the activism was going, because at points it was like an ocean or a wave or something, and it was going from one part of town, to another. And so like, okay, where is it that you need to be, Karanja? So you're using social media to keep up with that. So in that regard, it can be good. Obviously, all tools can be misused.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can be misused. And so, yeah, you have people who misuse social media. I think part of it is that we got to just have more intentionality about putting people on social media who can affect the conversations that we're having. I guess that sounds sort of abstract and esoteric, but we just need more people who have a sort of a vision of how to use it in a positive manner out there, affecting the conversations that are taking place, and don't just advocate and give it up to the people who just don't seem to be able to make a sense out of anything. So that would be something that sticks out to me. But it's changed the way that we do business so much with the Tri-State Defender. I mean, we were a weekly newspaper with a website that I'm not sure anybody knew where it was, right? And so we've gone from that into beefing up our website to now knowing that people access us this way mostly. When I started at the newspaper, we printed 8,500 newspapers a week. We now print 850 newspapers, right? And so the bulk of the people are reaching us through social media, through Facebook, through Twitter. So we're having to adjust how we do things. I mean, in the old days, we tried to get it up on the website and then shift it over to Facebook or Instagram or something like that. Now, sometimes we'll start it on social media and then swing back around. So just trying to keep up with the tool and make sure that I'm using it right. And that's the main thing. And so whether you're using this tool or another tool, it always gets back to a basic thing in journalism, where you get that information from and what is the source of it.
Okay, Terrance, before I come to you. So of course, PR firms normally will send out a news release to a media outlet, letting them know about something to cover. But I know when it's something related to a crime story, you may not get that. I know that most organizations will post something on Twitter, or they may post something on Instagram. So do you still believe that having a PR person to actually communicate to you directly is like the best way for you to get the factual information, and then use social media as a support? And anybody can answer. Terrance, why don't you respond, and then we'll let someone answer the second question.
Well, I think they're still necessary, because I mean, they're the bona fide spokesperson for the organization. So, they're the anointed spokesperson. Having said that, they may just be part of your story. So, I mean, I think we need to keep that in perspective. So, I mean, it's not about just being force fed. It's like, okay, yeah, we got that information. Now let's check out social media and see what people are actually saying. Because once again, their background is PR, public relations, or strategic communication. And their goal is to, make the company look good. We know what they do, but you're going to have people who have inside information. It's always important to check social media. I mean, it's always to check social media, see what people are saying. You have to gauge, because your audience is much bigger than the PR person. The PR person isn't going to check social media. They're going to check with their bosses.
Without a doubt.
Go ahead, Lynn. You can respond, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Okay. And I just wanted to add that social media certainly has a place in the news business and getting information out. And there are some times that it really works to the advantage of all of us. And I think about the case of George Floyd, where that bystander took that footage that showed what really happened in real time. And if she had not been there and that had not happened, the outcome of the trial and everything else might be completely different. So social media has been used in a positive effect. And the same thing with what happened with Tyree Nichols. If we hadn't really seen what happened, people's opinions would have been completely different. So it's just that we as journalists, we can't just rely on that. And as our colleagues have said, it is a tool, one of many tools that we use when we're putting together a major story.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat, and I'll ask for each one of you to respond. As editors, are there any tips you have for reporters on how to attribute sources that have been found on social media, or confirming people are who they say they are on social? So kind of like a check and balance type question from social media.
I mean, I would, if when someone said, here's a situation where someone said something over social media that got our interest, I responded to it, say, hey, can you give us a call? So you engage them. I mean, the idea of anonymity in social media, I think you need to be careful about that. Because the idea is that, as journalists, they know who we are. They know what we look like. My name is this. I work here. I'm willing to come out in the open. Now, if they have some knowledge that they are, and they're reluctant to reveal themselves, well, let's go to the chat room or call this number, and we can talk then. We don't have to do it, online, so to speak. But absolutely, I'm not going to say, someone said, but you can get. I'm thinking of situations that happened when my boss, when I had a boss that actually took something off social media and ran with it, and it was just as false as I don't know what.
Mhm.
Literally, we could have gotten sued to the bone if the people if they'd have had the resources and probably the know-how. Instead, we got basically embarrassed for like 3 days, and just so happened the publisher was out of town that week. So, and he
Yeah.
never knew about it. But, I certainly, look at social media. I mean, it's extremely important,
Well, there was a story back in 2016 that started on social media, and it was a false story. And it made it to the mainstream in terms of there was a press release a press conference that was held, but it actually started, and a lot of people responded to the social media post, not verifying that it was actually the truth. So, Lynn, why don't you give us your response to that, and then Adrienne and Dr. K.
Well, what Terrance has just said is the truth. If I were still in the business working today, and my advice to young people is check out all your sources. And certainly don't take anything anonymous on social media. And as the boss or the supervisor, I certainly wouldn't run with something that a reporter came to me and said they saw this on social media. Okay, that's a tip, maybe. But check it out. And there are many ways that you can confirm if this is the truth or not. But if you can't confirm it and dig into it more deeply, then you just have to let that go. But people now, publications across the board, are trying to be the first, trying to break the news. They want to be the one that broke it. And people know that. And you can be manipulated to a devastating effect. So check your facts and check out your sources. And that was true back in the day when I was in the newsroom, but it's true today. That's the only way to go.
Adrienne?
I don't think I can add anything.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Well, Dr. K, did you want to comment?
Well, I mean, I think the only thing that I would emphasize is that you just lean on your processes. Yeah, you check, to get confirmation, stuff like that, but you ought to already have processes in place at your workplace for how you're going to verify information, what you're supposed to do. So you lean into that. I mean, long before there was social media, I mean, I can remember being at the Commercial Appeal, and we had a process that you were supposed to go through before obituaries could get into the paper. And all of these elements were important. And if you didn't hit these, there was a possibility that you could get yourself into trouble. So one night, I finished my shift. I'm walking out. I'm actually in the lobby. I get called back to do one more obituary, right? So I go through step 1 and I go through step 2, but I didn't go through step 3. And then the next morning, I get a call early in the morning because I had not gone through the process, and the gentleman wasn't dead. It's like, whoa, my whole life is upside down here, because I didn't lean into the process. And so while technology has changed, that basic principle is there.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's talk about preparing reporters. So I mentioned brand journalism because that's what's being taught in the textbooks, and digital journalism, that's what's being taught. Even though I feel that there's still value in print journalism because, older, and I'm going to say generation. So baby boomers generation is, we still like to have like a hard copy so that we can read it that way. But millennials, Generation Z, they're more accustomed to using their cell phones. So how do you think journalism schools can play a more active role in preparing future reporters? So Terrance, why don't you start off since you're actually teaching in a journalism school?
I've heard that. And I said, one of the things I said is having various roundtable discussions with news media industry working professionals. I think you got to be careful when it comes to journalism schools and educators, because if you get so far away from the industry, meaning with time, certain things can change on you. And you may not be prepared for that, to handle it in the classroom. And what I mean by that is I've experienced that here where, there are people who probably hadn't worked in the industry, in 30 years, and not a big issue, except when you're giving certain advice that is no longer applicable. It's like me discussing film photography when the industry is fully digital. The film knowledge was great, but we are working in a digital world. So having said that, I think maybe, having, and these often looked upon as boards, you have alumni boards. Sometimes you have boards of people that kind of help certain programs. They're typically people working in the industry. So I say, every program needs that. I don't know if every program has that, but it's very helpful. Also engaging the community. I said engaging the community outside the university. And what I meant by that is that if the students are actually doing journalism, there's going to be so much you can do on campus. There may come a time when you can actually be very helpful by reporting off campus, which is what I do here at Delta Digital News. But there are certain situations where college newspapers have become the newspaper of a town or a city. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying they all should go that way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just simply saying if the opportunity lends itself, consider it. Consider it and do it if you can, if the powers that be allow you to do it. Because in the end, you're dealing with, I'm a government worker. Let's be real. I'm a government worker. I may be an educator. I'm a government worker. I may answer to someone who's never been in the field and could care less about journalism. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that and encountered that. Like, wait a minute, these are people who are chancellors. These people are akin to bureaucrats. I know the MO. I remember being in newspapers. Hey, you get a superintendent who works here for a few years, maybe 4, goes to another state, 3rd state, 3-state retirement, and they're out. That's their MO. Their MO is, retired by 60, 6 figures coming in every year. And if that means cutting and burning in, a program, they'll do it. They don't really have interest in it. They may do it, they may not, but it was actually done here at one point before I got here, and I learned that. So, yeah, in my opinion, you do have to keep that one foot, I think, in the professional world. And I think you do that best by having relationships with people who are working journalists.
Okay. Adrienne, thoughts?
I think when I encounter Gen Z and sort of millennials, like they're native to social media and digital things. Like they don't need to learn that stuff. You can't keep up with the stuff that they're learning each time. But what I do find that they struggle with is grammar and story structure and, a nut graph. So I think at journalism schools, they should just be leaning into like the basic stuff and just make the assumption that they're going to use those tools like, how to use TikTok. Like they know that stuff. They know how to make movies. They know how to do audio. I find them to be incredibly smart, even though they're not necessarily absorbing the news that we did. They're very good on social issues. But like, I am stunned by the number of, even on graduate school level, who struggle with story structure or can't put together a nut graph. So, and like even will be dismissive about grammar. So I just think like I would like them to get those things down, and that's what I would say to focus on.
Okay, Dr. K, and then we'll end with Lynn on that question.
Yeah, I don't keep up with journalism schools enough to really say what they ought to be doing more of. But to the degree that you get measured by what Adrienne's saying, I'm all for that, because I just run into a lot of people who do not know how to construct stories, and they're fresh out of journalism school. And she's right. It becomes really more painful when they got an attitude about it. So you can't really work with them in any kind of constructive way because some sort of way they've got into their mind that they already got that down. So that's a problem. But I would say that the other thing that sort of dovetails to that with me is that to the degree that they ought to do better. And to the degree that they aren't, they need to start doing this. But we just need people to know how to be critical thinkers. I mean, I'm telling you, folks, it doesn't even really matter so much if you're in journalism. I mean, it could be any field in the United States in any kind of way. You've got to be a critical thinker. You got to know how to take in information from other people. You got to know how to be with a group of people and come to a consensus that may be beyond your background, that may be with someone that's not your ethnic background, but you come together on principle. And you got to know that if you don't get that, you can't really live at 100% in a government institution that calls itself a republic, that's based on majority rule. You got to be able to learn how to do this. And that's what I see. People are just lost in space, man. And you go to meetings and people do not know how to have a meeting. It's so difficult to cover it because the meeting's out of order. There's nobody in charge, or everybody knows everything, or nobody knows anything. We do not know how to have conversations and critical thinking. And it's just so painful, and it's so acute when it comes to the African American community because we've got to do better, folks, and in a hurry.
Okay, Lynn.
And this is still about advice to students, right? In journalism, and I know that the younger generations, they get their news from different sources, and they may deliver their news differently. But journalism is journalism, and it all must be based on the facts, factual information. And that's what I'm hoping that journalism schools are teaching the young journalists, young people who want to be journalists. You have to know how to report. And that critical thinking, as my friend mentioned, is most important. And I will add to that, just basic common sense, which sometimes you wonder if people have that. But still, you have to know how to put a story together. And that's something that I learned in journalism school. And it took me on through internship to my stint with the Commercial Appeal and on to Ebony. You have to know the basics of journalism, whether you're writing a hard news story or a feature story. And that's regardless of whether your story is going to appear on social media in digital form or on television or wherever. You have to start with the basics of journalism, if that is what you want to call yourself.
And I think that the field of journalism, and this is just what my observation has been, is that some students don't really understand what it really means to be a journalist. And that means that you have to have good grammar, you have to know how to research, the critical thinking. I mean, you have to take a step further than just wanting to create just like a social media post. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to create a social media post, but it does take a lot of effort to put together a story. Yeah. So we're going to end this conversation with one last question. And I want to give Jennifer an opportunity to say something, the regional coordinator, before we close out. But what are some of the common mistakes that you guys see with AP style elements in stories that have been submitted?
Probably all of it. I work at a university, so.
Well, give us just one, Terrance. Give us one mistake.
Well, I mean, I used to see, when I was at the newspaper and came here, I used to see, age, they change age, so, it used to be, under 10, and now it's like, every number. But you see primarily when it comes to politicians, I mean, it's just it's small, minor things. It's nothing really big. I mean, it could be.
Are you gonna go with age? Is that gonna be your one?
I would probably say the ages of people. You know.
Okay, we gonna go.
Yeah, you know. Okay. That's probably what I'll go with. Yeah, I mean, I deal with college students who are coming right out of high school, and sometimes graduate students. But yeah.
Okay, Dr. K.
Yeah, I saw that question there, and I just really don't have one. And so what my answer really is that the thing that I run into is that just people who just don't seem to know that there is such a thing as AP. And I get a lot of, because it's the nature of what we do. You know, we use a lot of freelancers. We have no full-time reporters, so it's a revolving staff, and so you got to have a starting point for how you're going to do this, right? So you bring in AP. A lot of people just aren't familiar with it, right? So that's one problem. And the second deal is once you become familiar with it, is developing the habit to use it. It's online, it's free, and then you have Grammarly, you know. And while there's differences between Grammarly and AP, it's free. You can use it. Don't turn the story into me where the subject and verbs don't agree.
Yeah, that's really bad for an English teacher to hear broken verbs. Adrienne?
I think it's a tie between Oxford comma and not knowing the difference between an M dash and a hyphen.
Okay, that's a good one. Lynn?
You know, I really don't have much to say on this because I haven't been editing other people's copy in a long time. But there and there, you know, those kinds of things, getting the words mixed up. And
okay, synonyms. Okay.
Simple things, yeah, is just, you just see that too much.
Okay. Okay. Jennifer, do you want to say anything before we close out?
Oh, not really. You guys have done a fabulous job. I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives with us, and thank you so much.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put together some more educational opportunities with some of the topics that you guys mentioned. We really are trying to start a chapter here in Memphis because we see that there is not like, I know that what they're teaching in journalism schools may not be enough, but when you can hear it from working people, it kind of can resonate a little bit more or better. So that's what our goal is to try to have a chapter so that we can educate the future journalists of Memphis, Tennessee. Do you guys want to have any last comments before we close out?
You know, I'll just repeat what we all have said, you know. For students who want to get into this field, and it's a field that I love dearly, just learn the basics of grammar. And when you interview people, it's how you speak. You know, you have to have some proper grammar if you want to have a conversation with someone and get some information out of it. Just learn the basics of the business, the basics of journalism. That's so important.
Yeah, I'd just say for me, just, you know, for the new folks, the new students, just know what you're there for. I mean, figure out what you're doing there. I mean, is it, you know, to make X amount of money over X amount of time? Is it to be some type of social change agent? Is it some combination? Just figure out what it is, and also know that you can change, you know, through indirection, direction, fine. You can be going one way and you can decide, you know what, this just ain't it, you know, so don't get locked in.
Okay. Terrance, Adrienne?
I would say if you, number one, let them know that they have a career. And even though SPJ is not it's not a trade organization, so to speak, you work for a company, and that company can let you go. I know I've been let go. That company can let you go, but you still have a career once that company lets you go. You have skill sets, employable skill sets. Hopefully through SPJ and other organizations, you know people, and these people can help you out. So you never stop building your career. You may work for a company, and some companies they can treat you very nice, and that's great, but they can also let you go the next day, you know. And so remember, you're building a career. And so the reluctance, I think, to engage in, organizations like SPJ, I would say, be very careful not engaging, because once again, I know what it's like to go in and then have to go to the boardroom of the publisher and be let go. And now I'm wondering, okay, who can I call? What hookups do I have? Like, participate, get to know people, get to know other working professionals from across state lines, from across national lines, and let them know that they have it's a career. You build it, you continually build it. Even when a company may try and, chop it down, you're still building it. That was a job. This is a career.
Okay, Adrienne?
I guess I would just like to remind students that journalism is a public service. And so you're working in service of the community you're in. And so it's okay to, build your brand and get yourself, because it is a career and you make those kind of moves, but your brand can be built on like how you respond in a respectful and, in a beautiful way to your community, and the work you do to inform them and help the citizenry. So be humble.
Well, thank you guys again for agreeing to be a part of this panel. I mean, I'm excited that you guys were willing to be a part of it. We're going to record this and put it on the YouTube channel. So we can have other students to listen to it and other journalists. So thank you guys again, and y'all have a good night.